Good morning. When I go to Israel, I like to purchase antiquities. This oil lamp, 2,000 years old. So is this. This clay pot, 3,000 years old. I love to purchase one antiquity when I go, and usually only one because they're quite expensive. This is actually an idol. This is a fertility goddess. And the reason I'm showing it to you is because it just seems silly that someone would worship this. Nevertheless, today in Acts chapter 19, we discover a silversmith named Demetrius who made idols. Rather than clay, he made his idols out of silver. And these little idols were of Artemis. Artemis was the goddess of the Ephesians. And we'll finish Acts chapter 19 today, but just in case you missed the last couple of devotions, what we have is Demetrius becoming disturbed because people had quit buying his idols because Paul was sharing the gospel and he was telling people, this is not a God. You can't make a God with human hands. So Demetrius gets together with all of the other tradesmen. And in verse 25, he said, my friends, we make a good income with this business. We're making a lot of money. A few verses later, he says, and we can't forget about the great goddess Artemis. They didn't care about Artemis. King James Version says Diana, which is the Latin. They didn't care about this false god. They cared about the bottom line. So the other silversmiths agree, we've got to do something. And so they begin to shout in verse 28, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Then it says, soon the whole city was in an uproar. That's verse 29. The person they want is Paul. If they can get Paul, he will be executed on the spot before the law could get involved. But they could not find Paul, so instead, verse 29 tells us they seized Gaius and Aristarchus. They were traveling companions of Paul, and they rushed into the theater together. I have been to this amphitheater in Ephesus. One scholar estimates 25,000 people perhaps were there at this moment, and they were all shouting. So I love this. Verse 30 tells us that Paul wanted to appear before the crowd, and the disciples would not let him. The very next verse, verse 30, the friends of Paul begged him not to venture into the theater. Why did he want to go? He's a preacher. He sees 25,000 people. He's not afraid. That's a huge audience. He would go in there and share the gospel. I know that's what he was thinking. There was a time I was in Ankara, Turkey, with John Stone, and there was an anti-America rally on the street in this Muslim country. And I walked over. I wanted to get involved, and John Stone... He did not physically restrain me, but he urged me. It's probably not smart. You're an American. You may not want to go into a mob that's angry with America. And the same thing is happening here. Paul's friends said no, please. They begged him. And so he did not go. But the crowd is going crazy. It says in verse 33, the Jews pushed Alexander up front. Alexander, I suppose, is going to give a defense on behalf of the Jews. The Jews wanted to make sure that the crowd knew they had nothing to do with Paul and his teachings. But that didn't work. It says in verse 34, they realized he was a Jew and they shouted even more. You see, the Jews, although they did not embrace Christ, they also were opposed to idols. And I suppose they knew that. The Jews weren't good for business either. And it says for 2 hours, they're shouting, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Finally, the city clerk shows up and he quiets the crowd. He dispels the mob, and that's how the chapter concludes. A couple of thoughts. First, When you stand for truth, there will be opposition. I don't ever talk about it, but as a pastor, when I preach, I stand for that which is true. And I have opposition. I get hate mail sometimes. And if you stand for truth, you need to know going into it that the world may not agree. A second thought is that the way Paul dealt with the idolaters was by winning one more person to Jesus. What he did not do was picket in front of the Demetrius's shop. He did not hold up a sign that said, down with idolaters. He did not go to the temple of Artemis and have an anti-idol rally. He just kept winning people to Jesus. And as he won people to Jesus, they realized this is not a God at all. And they quit buying the idols. And the best way to change society is to do it one person at a time. Because when someone trusts Jesus, their heart changes and their behavior changes. And over time, society changes. That's why I have long said that the greatest hope for America is going to be found in the church. What America needs, what the world needs, is revival. And one final thought, as you go through opposition and as you get attacked from people in your life simply because you're taking a stand for what is right, ultimately, you are on the winning side and you will win. I've been to Ephesus twice, and you know what? It's ruins. The only people that go there now are archaeologists who dig in the dirt and tourists like me. Ephesus no longer exists. The temple of Artemis no longer exists. The silversmiths no longer exist. But the gospel of Jesus Christ lives on. People have forgotten the name Demetrius, but not the name Paul. You're on the winning side. It's going to work out in the end. Keep on being faithful, and you'll be glad that you did. Hey, I love you a lot. It means so much to all of us pastors at the church that you take time for the deep dive. You're hungry for the right things when you're hungry for the Word of God. We'll see you tomorrow.